Are we ready to go back on the record? We are starting with the Department of Health. Is that correct? Welcome back. And you're still under oath. Thanks. And you can move the whole thing closer to you.
CLF has no questions for this witness.
OER has no questions.
The town has a few questions. Good afternoon. As you know, my name is Mike McGorry. I represent the town of Barville, and I'm going to be asking you some questions about the DOH advisory opinions in the areas, as I understand it, of noise, lighting, and EMF. Correct?
Correct.
All right. So I'm going to start with the DOH advisory opinion number 1, September 12, 2016. Do you know if we're up and running? Can we put them on the screen now, or?
Yeah, I can do it.
And I'd like to start by looking at page 8. And it says at the top that it's issue number 2, noise. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Great. Now, were you responsible for drafting this, or did you participate in any way in this issue number 2 dealing with noise?
No, I didn't, because it was done by my predecessor, Barbara Morin, who was the environmental health risk assessment toxicologist before me, but she retired in June.
Okay.
So,
But you're familiar with it, and you're prepared to answer questions about it?
correct.
Okay. So let's look at the first paragraph, and I'm going to direct your attention to a few sections of this, and then we can talk about them. So the first paragraph, the second sentence begins, indoor and outdoor environmental noise exposures are unlikely to cause hearing loss, but have been linked to a variety of effects, including annoyance, cognitive effects in children, including impairment of reading comprehension and memory, sleep disturbances, and cardiovascular effects, including an increased risk of hypertension and myocardial infarction. Do you see that?
Yes.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree.
Now, this was prepared in September of 2016, and 2.5 years have gone by. Science, as we've seen, especially lately, can move very quickly. So to the extent science may have changed any of the conclusions that are set forth in here, or added or subtracted from any of the analysis here, will you bring that to my attention as we go through?
Yeah.
Thank you. So could we look at the third paragraph then, the first sentence? It says, several studies have confirmed that environmental noise, including noise from road, rail, and air traffic, can impair children's cognitive function. Do you see that? And is that still the case today, as you understand it?
Yes.
So noise from road traffic, would that include things like diesel tanker trucks?
Yes.
The next paragraph, the first sentence says, studies have demonstrated a link between transportation noise. Transportation noise, would that include, again, diesel tanker trucks?
Yes.
And cardiovascular effects, particularly hypertension, and an increased risk of myocardial infarction. Myocardial infarction is basically a heart attack, correct?
Correct.
And is that still the case today as far as you know?
Yeah.
And the last paragraph in the third line down makes a reference that wildlife are also affected by noise. And you know, is that still the case today as far as you know?
Yes,
And it's not a positive effect, it's a negative effect.
presumably, yeah.
Can we go to page 9, please? Down at the bottom, the heading says nighttime noise exposures. Do you see that?
Yes.
And the first sentence says, noise levels during nighttime hours are particularly critical because of the importance of undisturbed sleep to health and well-being. Correct?
Correct.
You still agree with that?
Yes.
Then there is a quote from the World Health Organization's 2009 guidelines set forth below that. And beginning on the second sentence of the quote, it says, however, adverse health effects are observed at the level above 40 decibels L-night. It's capital L-N-I-G-H-T, outside, such as self-reported sleep disturbance, environmental insomnia, and increased use of somnifacient drugs and sedatives. Therefore, 40 dBA L-night outside is equivalent to the lowest observed adverse effect level, defined as LOAEL, for night noise. Do you see that?
Yes.
So could you tell us, what do you understand this concept of lowest observed adverse effect level to mean?
In general, it's when we're doing risk assessment, they'll test up to a level where you don't see an effect, and then the first level that you do see an effect is the low L, or LOAEL. It's the lowest dose where an effect was observed in a toxicological study, or in this case, epidemiological.
All right, so the 40 dBA is basically the cutoff. Anything above 40 could have an adverse effect?
Potentially.
Okay. Let's go to page 10 then. And in the first paragraph after the two quotes, begins with as shown in table 2. Do you see that?
Yes.
It says the existing nighttime noise levels measured at all receptors except for M3, as shown in the correct application, were above the 40 dBA LOAEL. Do you see that?
Yes.
Now, a couple of things I'd like to just explore here so we get it all in context. These designations, for example, in this case of the M3, is a receptor that was measured. Is that correct?
Correct.
And what do we mean by a receptor?
Well, in this case, I think they were measuring, it's the location of the measuring device that was used to test, but in general, a receptor would be anywhere where noise is being either detected by your ears or detected by equipment.
They were setting up the reception equipment in various locations so they could determine what was going on noise-wise, correct?
Correct.
And the next paragraph, the first two sentences, the modeled nighttime noise levels associated with CREC operations were above the sleep effect LOAEL at all receptors except for M5. When the correct noise contributions were combined with existing noise levels, the total nighttime noise level at all sites were above the LOAEL. Do you see that?
Yes.
And is that a fair summary of what was set forth in the noise information that was provided to DOH?
Correct. Yeah.
Let's go to page 11. And right in the middle of the page, let's talk about daytime noise exposures. Do you see that heading?
Yes.
First sentence. Exposure to elevated environmental noise levels during daytime hours can cause annoyance and can impact speech intelligibility, children's cognition, and the cardiovascular system. You see that?
Yes.
Is that still the case as far as you know?
As far as I know, yeah.
The next paragraph, beginning with the second sentence, says existing daytime noise levels measured at all receptors except M3 were above the 50 dBA moderate annoyance threshold on at least one of the measurement days. Correct?
Correct.
And that's what the information provided to DOH demonstrated, correct?
Yes, I believe so.
Then the last paragraph, as shown in Table 3, the CREC analysis predicts that noise levels associated with construction activities will be highest at location M2, parens Jackson Schoolhouse Road, parens. At that location, average daytime noise levels from construction activities would be as high as 53 dBA, resulting in a total noise level at that site of 55-56 dBA, an increase of 4 to 5 dBA from current levels. Therefore, the total daytime noise at that location during construction activities would exceed the serious annoyance threshold and may cause a slightly increased risk of hypertension for nearby residents. Do you see that?
Yes.
As far as you know, is that still the case based on the science you're aware of?
I believe so, yeah.
Now, can we go down to two-thirds of the way down this page 12 that we're on, where it talks about day/night noise exposures? Do you see that heading?
Yes.
It says in the first sentence, another important measure of noise exposure is LDN, a metric which combines daytime and nighttime exposures. Do you see that?
Yes.
And skipping 2 lines, beginning with the sentence that starts, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, do you see that?
Yes.
Has identified a LDN of 55 dBA as the outdoor exposure level that would prevent annoyance. Do you see that?
Yes.
As far as you know, is that still the case with the EPA?
I believe so.
Could we go to page 13, please? So the paragraph just under Table 4 says, as shown in Table 4, the LDN noise level at M1 before the addition of CREC impacts was above 55 dBA, and the LDN impacts of the CREC operations alone at M1, M2, and M3 locations were at or above 55 dBA, the LDN value associated with cognitive effects in some children. The total LDN values for the 3 sites, M1, M3, and M4, for which existing LDN noise levels were available in the Algonquin application, were all above 55 dBA. Do you see that?
Yes.
And what you're talking about there is information that was also made available to DOH through the Algonquin application, where they were modifying their compressor station, correct?
I believe so, yes.
Now, the draft of this document was submitted to Invenergy, correct?
Correct.
And Invenergy submitted comments back to DOH before this advisory opinion was finalized, correct?
Correct.
And in fact, this next paragraph sets forth that Invenergy provided comments on the draft and, for example, stated that looking at total LDN was not appropriate for reasons they explained, correct?
Correct.
After reviewing Invenergy's comments, however, as shown in the last sentence of this paragraph, it states, RIDOH stands behind the conclusion above that predicted LDN noise levels associated with both the operation of the Algonquin facility and the operation of the CREC facility have the potential to cause cognitive effects in some children, correct?
Correct.
And this was even after receiving the comments on the initial draft from Invenergy, correct?
Correct.
The next paragraph is summary and conclusions, and it states, the measurements of existing nighttime and daytime noise levels in the vicinity of the proposed facility that exceed annoyance thresholds is consistent with testimonies submitted to the Efsb and RIDOH by residents living at or near these locations, correct?
Correct.
And in fact, DOH had public hearings before it issued this opinion, correct?
Correct.
And during those public hearings, DOH took a significant amount of testimony from members of the public, correct?
Correct.
And one of the issues that members of the public, particularly people in Burrillville who lived either near the site or on the transportation route to the site, complained about noise issues, correct?
Correct.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but what I understand DOH to be saying here is these measurements that they have are consistent with the types of complaints and concerns that were registered by the Burrillville people, correct, concerning noise.
Correct, especially with what's already present, like the compressor state station in particular.
Okay. Can we look at page 15, please? And right in the middle of the page, there's a quote, and it is a quote from the comments submitted by Invenergy, correct?
Correct.
And one of the things that the last sentence in that quote says, Invenergy has designed the correct facility such that its noise emissions are below that of the town's stringent limits and below WHO, World Health Organization, and US EPA noise level standards, correct?
Correct.
So you were aware that that's what Invenergy was planning to do, or the DOH was aware when they drafted this opinion, correct?
Correct.
But the next sentence says, RIDOH supports the applicant's efforts to reduce noise generation in the facility design. However, as several commentators noted, the ability of those measures to meet sound reduction goals in practice has not yet been proven. Is that correct?
Correct.
Going to the last paragraph, it says commenters expressed concern that the above recommendations would be difficult or impossible to enforce after the facility is built. RIDOH acknowledges that concern and urges the EFSB or other regulatory entities to explore mechanisms for ensuring that any unacceptable noise impacts that may occur are appropriately addressed, including but not limited to ensuring that any requirements established of the applicant to minimize noise disturbances are explicitly followed. Correct?
Correct.
And does DOH still feel that way?
Yes.
Now, I'd like to look at the supplemental advisory opinion of August 28, 2017. Do you have that with you as well?
Yes.
And maybe we could bring that up on the screen. And I'm going to start with page 4. Thank you. So, in the supplemental advisory opinion, DOH again dealt in section 6.0 with issue 2 called noise, correct?
Correct.
Now what I'd like to do is I'd like to look at page 5, the first full paragraph at the top of the page, which is coming up on the screen shortly. Oh, we lost it. That's okay. It says, RIDOH continues to strongly recommend that the EFSB establish clear noise limitations and require the correct facility, if constructed, to work in conjunction with Algonquin to ensure that neighborhood noise impacts are minimized to the fullest extent possible. Does DOH still feel that way? And I'd like to look at the summary of conclusions on page 10, please.
Just want to ask a follow-up question on that. When I look at the original and then the supplemental, despite what you say there, it sounds like you're still uncertain as to whether those mitigation measures would reduce the noise to the acceptable threshold. Is that right?
I don't feel like we were qualified to really make that estimate. I think the concern of the public is they'll say they'll keep it below X, but in reality, what happens if they don't? And so that was what that was trying to address.
Thanks.
But I don't think it was
Okay. Then to say,
implicitly
okay,
criticizing what they
got it.
were
Then I think that point has come up before. Thanks.
Was DOH made aware that the town hired a noise expert in this matter who questioned whether or not Invenergy would actually be able to make the noise level reductions they were promising?
I was aware of his testimony, and I read through it when I was preparing the first time I was supposed to. Don't remember the specifics of what he recommended.
But he did express concern about the ability to make these noise reductions, correct?
I believe so. You'd have to look at his testimony.
That's Mr. Hessler, does that sound familiar?
Yeah, I did read through it, but
Okay.
I didn't come prepared to testify on it.
Okay. So let's look at page 10 of the supplemental, down at the very bottom. The last sentence in the conclusion. If noise levels from operation of the facility, by itself or in conjunction with Algonquin, cause neighborhood disturbances, all available actions to mitigate those impacts should be pursued, including, but not limited to, equipment and operational modifications, soundproofing of impacted residents, and, if indicated, the purchase of properties subject to noise levels that cause serious annoyance and/or sleep disruption. Is that correct?
Correct.
And DOH still feels that way
Yes.
and is making that recommendation to this board, correct?
Correct.
That's all I have on the issue of noise. I could move on to lighting and EMF, or we could go around the room. I'm at the chair's discretion.
I'll leave it to the parties.
Chairperson, I suggest that Mr. McElroy go ahead and finish with them, and then,
Thank you.
rather than doing it piecemeal.
I'm happy to do that. I'll go on. So, we're now still on the DOH supplemental advisory opinion of August 28, 2017, if you have that. And I'm going to look at page 31, please.
Wait, which one? Oh, the original.
No, I don't think so. I think it's the supplemental. Unless,
Supplemental's on there.
okay, then it's my mistake. I stand corrected. It must be the original. Do you have it?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so page 31, the second bullet down at the bottom of the page talks about light pollution, correct?
Correct.
And that goes over to page 32, correct? Now, the very bottom of the analysis, just above the bullet that talks about cancer, do you see that last sentence?
Yeah.
It says, our DOH recommends that the applicant determine whether nighttime lighting will be installed at the facility and conduct an analysis of the impacts of any such lighting on neighboring residents. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Do you know if an analysis of the impact of nighttime lighting has been done to determine what the impact would be on neighboring residents?
I'm not aware.
So if one has been done, it has not been brought to DOH's attention.
Not explicitly.
But I assume you still feel that such an analysis would be important.
I think it would be helpful.
And going to page 35, the last bullet on the page makes essentially the same point. It says the application did not include sufficient information for evaluation of impacts of potential nighttime lighting of the facility. Such impacts should be evaluated when that information is available, correct? And as far as you know, that information has not yet been made available to you.
As far as
But that's all I have on lighting. And I'm going to move to EMF. So I'm going to start with the original. And look at page 2, please. In section 2.0, the second bullet talks about electromagnetic fields as being one of the things that the Efsb has asked you to take a look at, correct?
Correct.
So let's look at page 4 then. And we're looking at section 5.0, issue 1, electromagnetic fields. Do you have that? Now, there are...
I just noticed my little light went off at some point. Don't know how long that's not been transmitting, but...
Okay, thanks. So the EMFs consist of two different types of fields, correct?
Correct.
The E stands for electric, is that
Yes.
correct? And the M stands for magnetic, correct? All right. So when you're looking at EMFs, you're really looking at two issues in one. Is that fair? Okay. All right, so the second sentence in this first paragraph says, the new transmission lines will use an existing right-of-way, parens ROW, parens, for electric transmission lines. The ROW is currently populated by two sets of lines. The new lines will add a third set, and thereby increase the EMFs within the ROW and in close proximity to the ROW, correct?
Correct.
And as far as you know, that is still the plan?
Yes.
Then if you go down into the fourth paragraph, into the third line, it says increased EMF intensity would occur only within 100 feet of the ROW. This is because the intensity of an EMF diminishes very quickly as you move away from the source. As discussed above, EMF exposures in all areas beyond the ROW do not exceed health-based standards. Is that correct?
Correct.
As far as you know, that remains correct today?
Yes.
The next section deals with 60 hertz magnetic fields and cancer, correct?
Correct.
And the first sentence says, over the past 4 decades, many studies have been done to explore the potential relationship between exposure to 60 hertz extra low frequency, or ELF, magnetic fields and cancer, correct?
Correct.
And let's skip over to page 5. And I'd like to look at the first sentence just below the blocked quote. And it says, while there are many publications in the scientific literature purporting to demonstrate harmful health effects of EMF, there are many others which demonstrate no harmful health effects, correct?
Correct.
As far as you know, is that still the state of the science?
Yes.
Moving to page 6. Final paragraph. First sentence, please. Do you have it?
Yeah.
Great. It says, in short, epidemiological studies of the chronic health effects of exposure EMFs that have been done over the course of the last half-century have yielded only one weak link between EMFs and childhood leukemia. Is that still the state of the science as you understand it?
I believe so, yes.
And going down to the last 3 lines of that paragraph, the WHO, which again is the World Health Organization, correct?
Correct.
Estimates that EMFs from all sources, not just transmission lines, but all sources, may cause between 0.2% to 4.9% of the total annual incidence of childhood leukemia cases, correct?
Correct.
And going to page 7, please. The summary and conclusion. The proposed addition to the electrical transmission in the ROW to be used by CREC will increase the strength of magnetic fields therein and close by, but the resulting intensity of potential human exposure is well within limits set by international standard-setting agencies. Furthermore, EMFs have not been demonstrated to create health risks, acute or otherwise, at the levels generated by the transmission lines in question. For this reason, the health impact of CREC attributable to EMFs is negligible and may in fact be non-existent. Is that correct?
Correct.
Is that still DOH's opinion?
Yes.
And as far as you know, is that still the state of the science?
Yes.
The DOH issued a supplemental advisory opinion on August 28, 2017, correct?
Correct.
And on page 3, if you would,
Yes.
section 5.0, issue 1 is electromagnetic fields, correct?
Correct.
Now it indicates that DOH issued a data request for more information about the electric and magnetic fields, correct?
Correct.
And it said that the applicant supplied a letter dated December 28, 2016 from Exponent, EXPONENT, which I assume is Invenergy's consultant in this area, correct?
I believe so.
And it said exponent updated the analysis of transmission line electromagnetic field impacts in the original CREC Efsb application, correct?
Correct.
So in other words, you issued a data request and they provided you with more information. Is that correct?
Correct.
And if you could go down to the table at the bottom of this page,
Yeah.
it shows the changes that were provided by this additional information, correct?
Correct.
Right, and so there are two columns that are shown here with two columns in each of the main columns. The first column is maximum magnetic field, and the second column is maximum electric field, correct?
Correct.
Because as we've discussed, the EMF deals with both issues, correct?
Correct.
So there are three locations set forth for all of these figures. The first location being on the right-of-way, the second location being at the edge of the right-of-way, and the third being 100 feet from the edge of the right-of-way. Is that correct?
Correct.
So I'm going down the list and I'm looking at the numbers, and it appears to me that in each case, the information submitted by Invenergy has higher impact figures than in the original analysis. Is that correct? So for example, let's look at the magnetic field column on the right-of-way. Originally they said 366 mGs. I'm not sure exactly what that is. Do you know what an mg is?
I don't.
Well, it's the measurement of magnetic fields,
Yes.
correct? All right.
Correct.
So it was original.
But
All right. It was originally 366, and in the update it went up to 372, correct?
correct.
And on the edge of the right-of-way it went from 79 to 84, correct?
Correct.
And on 100 feet from the right-of-way it dropped a little bit from 19 to 17, correct? Now, looking at the electric fields in the next large column, the original analysis on the right-of-way went slightly down from 7.7 to 7.6, correct?
Correct.
On the edge, a bit up from 1.5 to 1.7, correct?
Correct.
And on 100 feet from the edge, up slightly from 0.14 to 0.2, correct?
Correct.
Going to the top of page 4. It talks about the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, also known as the ICNIRP, correct?
Correct.
And that's an international agency that the World Health Organization has established, correct?
I believe so.
And mainly you're looking at these international standards because we don't have any local standards to look at, correct?
Correct.
And the recommendation that's set forth therein is that the general public's exposure be limited to 2,000 mGs for magnetic fields and 5 kV/m for electric fields, correct?
Correct.
It states that the predicted maximum electric field on the right-of-way is higher than that recommendation, but public access to that area is limited, correct?
Correct.
Since predicted levels of magnetic and electric fields outside the right-of-ways are substantially lower than the ICNIRP recommendations, RIDOH continues to support the conclusion, in the original opinion, that the health impacts of electric and magnetic fields from transmission lines associated with the facility are minimal. Is that still Department of Health's opinion?
Yeah.
Could I ask, what about the people who have to work underneath the transmission lines to either cut the grass or the shrubs that are growing or make repairs to the line or any of those folks would in fact be exposed to a predicted maximum electric field over the standard for set by this ICNIRP, correct?
Correct, but generally, this is an average exposure, not like acute exposure. So it's averaged over their entire life. So they're going home and presumably exposed to less. And also, usually you have one set of rules for occupational and another set of rules for environmental exposure.
Do you know if the ICNIRP has issued those differing rules for occupational and other exposures?
As far as I know, they haven't, but the occupational would be through like OSHA or NIOSH. NIOSH would do research related to it, and OSHA would issue standards. But
Do you know if there are standards issued by
I
OSHA for this?
don't know for sure if or what those standards would be.
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming again.
Does anyone else have a question?
Invenergy has a few. Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Burns. Mike Blazer for Invenergy. Could you tell me again the name of the original author of the original and supplemental Department of Health opinions?
It was a committee, but Barbara Morin, M-O-R-I-N, did most of the drafting work.
And do you know if Ms. Morin has a medical background? Is she a doctor or an MD?
No, sure. Her background is more in air pollution because she worked at DEM for a long time, and then toxicology.
Did she have did she have a background in epidemiology?
She has some experience working with it, but she doesn't have a background in it.
And then turning to you, I believe you do have some background in epidemiology, is that correct?
I've done some epidemiological work. I have a PhD in toxicology, and I've done some epi. I taught a semester of an undergraduate epi class.
Okay. Where was that?
At Illinois State University.
All right. In the oddly named town of Normal?
Yes.
All right, if you could turn to what we'll call the original advisory opinion from September 12, 2016, and go to page 8. And I'm going to follow what Mr. McElroy did in terms of starting with noise, then going to lighting, and then going to EMF. And I'm actually going to start on the same page that he did, which is page 8. And I'm going to read to you. It's the second paragraph. It's the one that Mr. McElroy didn't touch on, but I want to ask you a couple of questions about it, and I'll read it first for the record. Noise-related annoyance manifests as sleep disruption, interference with speech intelligibility, stress reactions, and negative feelings, such as anger, depression, and anxiety. The World Health Organization defines health as, quote, a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity, close quote. Therefore, noise-related annoyance is considered a health effect. According to the WHO, to the WHO, sleep disturbance, one of the most common complaints raised by noise-exposed populations, can have a major impact on health and quality of life. It goes a little bit farther. People can recognize and react to sounds even when they are asleep. Bless you. Bless you. They are asleep. It's going to be a bad allergy season. Those reactions, including awakening and changes in sleep stage, are associated with daytime after effects, such as sleepiness, reduced cognitive and motor performance, and impairment of cardiovascular function. And that's still DOH's position, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Based on whatever experience you may have, is annoyance in and of itself a medically recognized condition?
Not in and of itself. I think the concern is that it will lead to other effects.
Okay, so we'll get to that one. Are you familiar with something known as the International Statistical Classification of Diseases and Related Health Problems, also known as ICD-10?
Yeah.
Okay. What do you know that to be?
It's basically the doctor's list of diagnoses that are out there.
Right. It's essentially the internationally recognized list of all known health conditions.
Yeah, I believe, yeah.
Okay. And are you aware that in the ICD-10 is actually maintained by the WHO? Are you aware of that?
That seems right.
Okay. And are you aware that the ICD-10 does not identify annoyance as a health condition?
I assume that's true.
Okay. I mean, there are any number of things that could be annoying to a particular subset of individuals, right?
Correct.
I mean, listening to my voice right now, I'm sure is annoying pretty much everybody in this room, right?
I don't know. I mean, I assume it would be annoying to you.
They would agree, yes. And I have a feeling at least a couple of them might agree. But
I know I hate the sound of my own voice.
okay. So let's go to page 9 of the original advisory. And you'll see below the table 1 there, there's a discussion about the applicant's analysis. See that? Yeah. And the applicants in Venergy are Clear River. You're aware of that? Yeah. Okay. And the opinion, I won't read the whole paragraph, but it indicates or confirms that our Venergy's analysis predicted that noise from construction of the proposed facility would not increase ambient levels significantly, and that the average individual is likely to tolerate construction noise given its temporary nature, and that the majority of construction will take place during daytime hours. You see that?
Yes.
Is that still Department of Health's position?
I believe that's a quote of what Invenergy said, but I don't have a reason to doubt it.
Right. And in fact, this advisory opinion doesn't disagree with the applicant's position, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then, staying on the same page, find the bottom of the process. There was no one. And there's a discussion in multiple places in the noise discussion about the World Health Organization's night noise guidelines for Europe, correct?
Correct.
And staying on page 9 at the bottom, and I think Mr. McElroy had you go through this part, the advisory opinion states that 40 dB is equivalent to the lowest observed adverse effect level for nighttime noise, correct?
Correct.
And would you agree with me that nighttime noise is a particular concern because that's, generally speaking, when people are sleeping, correct? Okay. And the specific concern is sleep disturbance, right? So when we were talking before about annoyance in and of itself not being a health condition, the health condition that arises from noise is whatever effect results from sleep disturbance, correct?
That's the major one. You have some other things associated with not being able to communicate fully, but with the daytime noise. But the big concern is the nighttime.
Right. Because of sleep disturbance and what that can result in.
Correct.
Okay. And that's in fact, if we look at nighttime noise exposures at the bottom of page 9, that's specifically the concept that introduces this discussion. The advisory says here, noise levels during nighttime hours are particularly critical because of the importance of undisturbed sleep to health and well-being. And that's what we just discussed, right?
Yes.
Okay. So just to bring us back to this project, are you aware that Clear River has committed to be no higher than 43 dBA at the nearest residences along Wallem Lake Road under normal operating conditions?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
Okay. And are you also aware that the analysis, the noise analysis that the Department of Health reviewed, Clear Rivers analysis, reflects that that 43 is the maximum noise level during all normal operating conditions? Are you aware of that?
I don't remember that specifically.
Okay, I'm just going to read this to you. I don't think we need to pull it up. This is from Invenergy Exhibit 63. It's, 33. Mr. Hankard's pre-filed testimony, page 16, lines 4 to 14. Question, have you reviewed the RIDO advisory opinion? Answer, yes. Question, do you have an opinion regarding its noise analysis and conclusions? Answer, I have a number of comments regarding RIDO's advisory opinion. Final, dated September 9, 2016. First, RIDO states that modeled CREC noise levels exceed the World Health Organization's annual average nighttime standard of 40 dBA. In my response to RIDO's draft opinion, I noted that the correct noise levels they cite are maximum noise levels, full operation and atmospheric conditions conducive to efficient sound propagation in all directions, while the WHO standard is the annual average of the 8-hour nighttime average. RIDO concedes as much in their final opinion. Does that refresh your recollection of
Yeah.
Okay. What we're talking about here is a maximum, right? Okay. All right, let's go back to the WHO night noise guidelines, the WHO night noise guidelines. Are you aware that the limits that they talk about, including the 40 dBA that's addressed in the RIDO opinion, is an annual average?
Yes.
What I'm going to circulate, Mr. Burns, is an excerpt. The whole thing is quite a bit longer, but an excerpt of the 2009 WHO night noise guidelines. Wait till this is done doing that. Yes. Well, I don't know if it can be administrative notice or not. I would suggest we make it an exhibit just to be safe. Council, any objection to admitting this as full?
CLF has no objection to admitting this as full, but I would note that it has not been provided in advance. It was not provided as the EFSB rules require, I think 10 days before the final hearing commenced, which was April 11th, 2018. And if an exhibit like this, which has not been shared with the EFSB and has not been shared with council, is to be admitted as an exhibit, then I think the Blackstone Heritage Corridor's letter to the EFSB, which has been in the record of this case since August 25th, 2016, which the EFSB has reviewed, which the parties have reviewed, could by the same token be admitted as an exhibit, or in the alternative have the EFSB take administrative notice of it. CLF is all for allowing everything in and having the board give materials, testimony documents the weight that it deserves. But I think there's a bit of sauce for the goose and sauce for the gander here.
OER has no objection to Invenergy 219 coming in as well.
The town feels exactly as CLF does. And I'd like to point out that the DOH advisory opinion that we are discussing right now was September 12, 2016. You know, by and large, we've had a very good working relationship with Invenergy. And for the most part, prior to cross-examination of a particular witness, you know, Mr. Walker comes to mind. We received a large stack of documents that Mr. Blazer wanted to use to cross-examine Mr. Walker, and we had a few days to review them in advance and determine whether or not we were going to object. And I thought we had that arrangement worked out between us. I'm surprised that this is being offered today. Obviously, I don't have the opportunity to read it. It's just my concern that if these things are going to be offered, we can't review them on the fly here. The witness is going to be reviewing it on the fly as well. I don't think it's the right approach. On the other hand, given my quick skim of this, I would have no objection to it coming in either as administrative notice or as a full exhibit. But I agree with my brother's suggestion that the Blackstone Heritage Corridor letter falls within that same category, even more so because the parties have all had access to it for years. It's not a surprise, whereas Invenergy 219, the World Health Organization, noise guidelines, something I'm seeing for the first time today. So I join in my brother's statement. Thank you.
Since there's no objection to admitting it as a full exhibit, give me a minute.
Thank you, Chairperson. Mr. Burns, are you familiar personally with the 2009 WHO, I don't know why I keep doing that, night noise guidelines for Europe?
Yes.
Good, right, all right.
I wouldn't be if I hadn't been preparing for this.
So you at least have the presence of mind to review this since it was part of the RIDO opinion, correct?
Correct.
Good. So let's go to, and again, this is obviously this is an excerpt. So if you could go to the last page of the excerpt, which at the top says page 108. And you'll see there's a section 5.6, recommendations for health protection. See that? Okay. And there's a table here, and we'll get back to this table. This is this is where the numbers in the RIDO opinion came from, right?
Correct.
Okay. And then just so we're clear, if you look at the bottom, footnote 2, and I'll read it for the record. L, night, comma, outside, in table 5.4 and 5.5 is the nighttime noise indicator, paren L night, close paren, of Directive 2002/49/EC of 25 June 2002, the A-weighted long-term average sound level as defined in ISO 1996-2:1987, determined over all the night periods of a year, in which, the night is 8 hours, paren, usually 2300 to 700 local time, close paren. A year is a relevant year as regards the emission of sound, and an average year as regards the meteorological circumstances. The incident sound is considered. The assessment point is the same as for L sub DEN, period, and then it cites to an official journal. You see that?
Yeah.
So what we're dealing with here in this table that we're going to look at in a moment, which talks about L night outside, is the yearly average of noise measured outside, correct? Okay. And this may seem obvious, but that's different than measuring shorter-term maximum levels, correct?
Correct.
All right. And then, I'm just going to read this, we don't have to jump back to your advisory. It's something that Mr. McElroy asked you about. It's on page 9, and the original advisory says, as shown in Table 2, the existing nighttime noise levels measured at all receptors for M3, as reported in the CREC application, were above the 40 dBA LOAEL. Note that those levels were short-term measurements and may not accurately represent average nighttime levels measured over a longer period. You see that?
Yes.
Okay. So that's...
Page 10, though, just to...
It's
correct.
10.
Did I say page 9? I
Yes.
do apologize. I'm
Okay.
sorry, it is page 10. And that's the RIDO opinion acknowledging that there's a difference between the outside yearly average and the short-term maximum readings, correct?
Correct. I believe they thought it was the average over that short-term period, not the maximum. But I could be wrong since I wasn't there for...
Okay. We may get there.
Yeah.
So let's stay with the WHO excerpt. So the introduction to this section 5.6, and I think this is very much consistent with the concept that's being addressed in the original Department of Health opinion. And the WHO says here, sleep is an essential part of healthy life and is recognized as a fundamental right under the European Convention on Human Rights, European Court of Human Rights 2003, close paren. Based on the systematic review of evidence produced by epidemiological and experimental studies, the relationship between night noise exposure and health effects can be summarized as below, Table 5.4, and that's again the table that we talked about just a few moments ago, correct?
Correct.
All right. And if we look at the table, the one that I think your advisory opinion, your department's advisory opinion is focusing on the most is the second one from the bottom. Bless you. 40 to 55 dB. Adverse health effects are observed among the exposed population. Many people have to adapt their lives to cope with the noise at night. Vulnerable groups are more severely affected. Did I read that correctly?
Correct.
Okay. And that is the principal focus of whatever concerns may exist about noise in the RIDO advisory opinion, correct? Okay. All right, let's go back then to the original advisory opinion. And we're at the top of page 10. And it says, the WHO document also states that when nighttime noise levels are between 40 and 55 dB, this is what I just read, you see, and this is quoting from what I just read from the night noise guidelines, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And it talks about adverse health effects are observed among the exposed population, correct?
Correct.
All right, let's talk about the exposed population. Are you aware that the WHO guidelines address outdoor to indoor corrections in order to convert the outdoor numbers in the chart to indoor numbers so that they can accurately assess noise impacts when residents would be sleeping in their homes?
That sounds right. I haven't gone through this thoroughly.
All right, let's turn to the page numbered 9 of the WHO excerpt. It's actually I believe it's the third page of this document. You'll see down at the bottom, there's a section 1.3.4.4.
Yeah.
Inside to outside.
Yeah.
All right. And this, as you can see from the page number, this is roughly at the very beginning of the night noise guidelines, correct? All right. And I'll read this for the record. And you've seen this before, right?
Yeah.
As the L night is a year value, the insulation value is also to be expressed as such. This means that if the insulation value is 30 dB with windows closed and 15 dB with windows open, the resulting value is 18 dB if the window is open 50% of the time. If these windows are closed only 10% of the time, the result is a little more than 15 dB. The noise is complicated by the fact that closing behavior is, the issue is complicated by the fact that closing behavior is to a certain extent dependent on noise level. When results about effects are expressed with indoor, that is, inside bedrooms, exposure levels, they need to be converted to L night in accordance with the END definition. The most important assumption is that the correction for inside levels to outside levels. An average level difference of 21 dB has been chosen, as this takes into account that even in well-insulated houses, windows may be open a large part of the year. Do you see where I'm reading from?
Yes.
Okay. And do you agree with me that WHO is saying this because their figures are, for noise exposure, are, as we discussed previously, annual averages. So, therefore, the outdoor to indoor correction also needs to be averaged according to the percentage of the year that windows would be open, correct?
I believe, that is going to factor in, but I believe like the numbers from their table were based on outside levels.
Right, no, and we'll get there.
Okay.
Yeah, the numbers from the table are outside.
Yeah.
That's why I'm talking about now are about what they say in order to convert those outside numbers into what the indoor numbers would be to determine what the exposed population is actually being exposed to.
Correct.
You agree with that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So then let's go to page 10, the next page of the WHO excerpt. And you see section down about the middle of the page, 1.3.5, inside-outside differences.
Okay.
And it says here, nighttime environmental noise affects residents mainly inside their homes. In order to protect residents inside their homes from noise from outside sources, attention should be focused on windows since they are generally the weakest points in the sound propagation path. You see that?
Yeah.
And you agree with that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then if we go to page 11 of the same document, you'll see that after considering all factors and taking the annual average into account, the WHO concludes with an outdoor to indoor correction of about 21 dB on average. Do you see that?
Is that? Yeah. Yeah, I see that.
There's a lot of discussion here, but right about in the middle of the page, there's a sentence. This results in average inside-outside differences of around 21 dB, with there being only a slight difference between single and double glazed windows, and there's a reference to table 1.4.
Right.
Okay. So if we go back to Clear River's 43 dBA limit, and we just consider that a yearly average because we don't actually know what the yearly average here is going to be. All we know is that 43 is going to be the maximum. But let's call that a yearly average for now. The 21 dB deduction results in an indoor level of 22 dB. Is that correct? 43 minus 21?
I don't think they're not linear, so, well, I'm not sure. I'm not an expert in noise, but
All right.
yeah, let me just check there. Yeah, I guess that is the difference. Sorry.
Okay.
I just wanted to check with you.
And then if we go back to the table at the end on page 108, the list in the WHO guidelines, that 22 dB obviously is well below the 30 dB level up at the top. That results in, quote, no substantial biological effects or no observed effect level, correct? That's what NOEL stands for.
Where are you referring to?
I'm sorry, it's the table on page 108,
Oh, okay. All right, so it's good.
up to 30 dB,
Yeah,
table 5.4.
yeah.
Although individual sensitivities and circumstances may differ, it appears that up to this level, no substantial biological effects are observed. Night outside of 30 dB is equivalent to the NOEL for night noise. You see that?
Yes.
And Mr. McElroy mentioned Mr. Hessler, the town's retained acoustician. Are you aware that Mr. Hessler described a level of 26 dB, 4 dB higher than what Clear River would generate on average indoors at homes along Wallen Lake Road as, quote, total silence?
I've read through it before. Sounds like what? It's pretty quiet.
All right. We're done with the WHO. Let's go back to your original, the first advisory, the one from 2016, page 15. And Mr. McElroy had you go through some of this, and this is the third paragraph from the bottom, where the advisory said that RIDO supports the applicant's efforts to reduce noise generation in the facility design. Do you see that?
Yes.
And the opinion goes on to state that RIDO strongly recommends that the EFSB establish clear noise limitations and require the CREC facility, if constructed, to work in conjunction with Algonquin to ensure that neighborhood noise impacts are minimized to the fullest extent possible. You went through that with Mr. McElroy, you recall. And are you aware that Clear River in this proceeding has committed or has agreed to a permit condition that would require it to not exceed 43 dBA or it could not operate?
I wasn't familiar with the specifics, but that sounds, I believe it.
Okay. Accept that from me, because
Yeah.
it is in the record.
Yeah.
And again, I want to reiterate that we've committed that the facility will not operate unless it meets that 43 dBA limit. So you'll accept that?
Yeah.
Is that the type of clear noise limitation and compliance requirement that's referenced in the advisory opinion?
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay. All right, let's turn to one other thing. Let's go, this is something that came out in your, Mr. McElroy's questioning. Back to page 10. This might be from your supplemental, pardon me. Yes, your supplemental, excuse me, the Department of Health supplemental, bottom of page 10. It's the bulleted paragraph there. RIDO continues to strongly recommend that the EFSB establish clear noise limitations. You see where I'm referring to?
Yeah.
If noise levels from operation of the facility, I'm skipping a few words here, by itself or in conjunction with Algonquin, cause neighborhood disturbances, all available actions to mitigate those impacts should be pursued, including but not limited to equipment and operational modifications, soundproofing of impacted residences, and, if indicated, the purchase of properties subject to noise levels that cause serious annoyance and/or sleep disruption. correct? And that's still your position, or
Yeah.
the Department of Health's position, correct?
Yeah.
Now, obviously, before we got to the point of mitigation or corrective action, we'd have to first confirm that an exceedance was occurring, correct? So, speaking on behalf of the Department of Health, would you agree that a written and established procedure for addressing complaints, a complaint resolution procedure, should be a condition of this permit?
That would make sense.
Okay.
And to be clear, would M1 be the receptor where we were looking for the 43? Where would that be?
For the 43, I don't remember the specific. Yeah, I believe M1's the closest and yeah, the worst. Yeah. Yeah, that's the 40.
Okay.
Okay. All right, let's go to lighting. Back to your original advisory. Excuse me one moment, please. Original advisory, my notes say page 32, I hope they're right.
Probably.
Well, I've been wrong a lot. And this is where, here we go, it's about the first full, the paragraph after the first quote. Rideau acknowledges that studies have documented health effects associated with shift work and other situations, paren, e.g. hospital settings, and the extensive use of electronic devices, close paren, in which people are exposed to bright light over long periods. However, it is not clear how those studies would pertain to this situation. And is that still Rideau's position?
Correct.
Okay. And then the next sentence, the opinion states that the Invenergy application did not include sufficient information to evaluate the nighttime lighting impacts of the facility. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Now, you know, so this opinion was submitted September 12, 2016, correct?
Correct.
And then the supplemental opinion was submitted August 28th of 2017, correct?
Correct.
Are you aware that after the original advisory, but before the supplemental advisory, Invenergy filed responses to data requests regarding lighting?
I was not aware.
Okay.
Right.
Could we circulate 91C?
We'll pull it up.
Oh, we can pull it up. That's fine. Thank you. So we're going to reference Invenergy Exhibit 91C. And while they're grabbing it, Mr. Burns, I'll represent to you, that's a June 19, 2017. So roughly 2 months before the supplemental advisory was filed. And it's a response to write-up to the Department of Environmental Management's data requests. There we go. And for the record, Invenergy submitted lighting plans, a lighting technical memorandum, and a nighttime visual assessment report. Have you ever seen this before?
I haven't.
So let's go to the first page, just so we make sure whether he's seen it or not. Any of that look familiar?
If it is, I glanced through it when I was preparing the first
Okay.
time. It was back in August.
Okay. Well, let me Okay. Let's go to Exhibit C of 91C and page 2. All right. Now this is just for the record and for your information. Exhibit C is the nighttime visual assessment. And at the bottom of the page it states, this is a quote, "Based on the result of the visual simulations and previously completed visual assessment, the CREC facility will have minimal nighttime visibility throughout the visual study area." You see that?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll be fair, since you've never seen this before, you have no basis for either agreeing or disagreeing with that statement. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay. Have you reviewed at all the testimony of Trevor Hollins, Hollins, Invenergy's lighting expert?
I have not.
I'm going to read you something from what he said. This is Invenergy Exhibit 44, which is his pre-file direct, page 7, lines 16 to 23. Invenergy intends to incorporate design features into the CREC lighting systems to mitigate light pollution and the impacts of lighting on the surrounding plant and animal life. The lighting design will incorporate features such as luminaire shielding, limited wavelengths, correlated color temperature, and adaptive lighting controls to minimize light pollution from the site and minimize disruption of the surrounding habitat by lighting. The proposed design features will reduce the impact of light pollution on the surrounding habitats while allowing the CREC to operate as intended, meeting the needs and safety of the personnel of the CREC. Now again, recognizing that if you did ever read this, it was a long time ago, does that sound like a good thing?
Yeah.
Okay. From your perspective as the testimony for the Department of Health, would implementing a lighting design plan like that alleviate concerns about light pollution impacting nearby residences?
Yeah.
And then when we look at page 32 of your original advisory, we're still there, and this is a line that Mr. McElroy covered with you, where it says, "RIDO recommends that the applicant determine whether nighttime lighting will be installed at the facility and conduct an analysis of the impacts of any such lighting on neighboring residences." Does it sound to you, based on what you've heard, both from the response to the data request and from Mr. Holland's testimony, that Clear River has in fact done that?
It does.
Okay. All right, let's go to EMF. Almost done. And that takes us back to page 4 of the original advisory. And this is the third paragraph. The estimated increased EMF strength at the edges of the right-of-way does not exceed existing standards as set by international organizations for whole-body exposure to 60 hertz fields for the general public. Is that still the Department of Health's position?
Yes.
goes on, as the applicant points out, these exposure limits are based on extensive weight of evidence reviews and evaluations of relevant health research, and are designed to prevent acute short-term biological responses, such as perception, annoyance, and the stimulation of nerves and tissue that can occur excuse me, at very high EMF exposure levels to which the general public might be exposed. And does Department of Health agree with that?
Yeah.
Next paragraph. Furthermore, the applicant's results demonstrate that the projected intensity of the magnetic field that will be produced 100 feet from the right-of-way when CREC is operating at peak load is equal to the existing intensity of the magnetic field at the border of the right-of-way. So the increased EMF intensity would occur only within 100 feet of the right-of-way. This is because the intensity of an EMF diminishes very quickly as you move away from the source. As discussed above, EMF exposures in all areas beyond the right-of-way do not exceed health-based standards. Is that still the Department of Health's position?
Yes.
All right, now let's go to page 7 of the original advisory. Top of the page. And I think Mr. McElroy had you look at a portion of this. I want to look at the whole thing. It says, note that due to the fact that EMF strength decreases rapidly with distance from a source, EMF exposures from other sources, including household appliances, electronic devices, and local electric power supply lines, are likely to be far greater than exposure from high-tension power lines. Does the Department of Health still agree with that?
Yes.
Then the next line, therefore, it is very unlikely that the additional EMF generated by the transmission lines connecting to the CREC facility would cause a significant increase in the number of children who develop leukemia in the state. Is that still Department of Health's position?
Correct.
And then down, summary and conclusion on the same page. The proposed addition to the electrical transmission in the right-of-way to be used by CREC will increase the strength of magnetic fields therein and close by, but the resulting intensity of potential human exposure is well within limits set by international standard-setting agencies. Still DOH's position?
Yeah.
Furthermore, EMFs have not been demonstrated to create health risks, acute or otherwise, at the levels generated by the transmission lines in question. Still DOH's position?
Yes.
And finally, for this reason, the health impact of CREC attributable to EMFs is negligible and may in fact be non-existent. Still DOH's position?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go to the supplemental advisory. This is page 4. And this addresses the fact that I think Mr. McElroy walked you through, that you received some updated figures from Exponent, correct?
Correct.
And then, so at the bottom of page 4, the supplemental says, it goes on to page 5. The updated CREC analysis listed, I'm sorry, this is noise, I apologize, I'm at the wrong spot.
It's at the top.
We have to take a quick break.
Oh, sure, okay.
That's okay.
Mr. Burns, I apologize because I can't recall if Mr. McElroy covered this or not, but I'm just going to cover one more thing in the MF. It's the top of page 4 of the supplemental opinion. And I know he covered with you the ICN IRP, for what it's worth, 2,000 milligauss. I'm surprised Jerry didn't know that. Anyway, the last line here, since predicted levels of magnetic and electric fields outside the right-of-ways are substantially lower than the ICN IRP recommendations, RIDO continues to support the conclusion in the original opinion that the health impacts of electric and magnetic fields from transmission lines associated with the facility are minimal. Is that still the Department of Health's position?
Yes.
That's all I have, Chairman. Thank you.
I have a couple, but I'm happy to go back to you, Mr. McElroy.
Thank you.
I'll go
Thank you,
there.
Director. I have just a couple. Mr. Burns, Mr. Blazer asked you about certain data responses in Energy 91C regarding lighting, and he asked you about testimony of Mr. Hollins in Energy Exhibit 44 regarding lighting, and you said you'd never seen them, correct?
Correct.
And so when the original advisory opinion was prepared, and you recommended on page 32 that the applicant determine whether nighttime lighting will be installed at the facility and conduct an analysis of the impacts of any such lighting on neighboring residents. Clearly, this was directed to Invenergy. They saw this opinion and they knew this is what DOH was looking for, correct?
I assume so. I don't know what they thought, but yeah.
Did Invenergy ever send you Exhibit 91C, the data responses, or Invenergy 44, the testimony of Mr. Hollins to review?
Not to my knowledge, but I wasn't here at that time, so I can't really say what Barbara got.
Can I assume that DOH has a file, electronic or otherwise, on these advisory opinions?
Yeah.
And can I also assume that if information such as these data responses or this testimony had been received by DOH, they would have gotten into that file?
Presumably, yeah.
And can I assume that you reviewed that file prior to taking the stand?
I did, but I haven't gone through it in detail this round one because I was originally scheduled a couple times, so I haven't gone back in detail. But so it's possible it was in there and I didn't see it, but I don't think it was there.
That's all I have. Thank you very much.
I just, in your supplemental, pages 10 and 11, you once again summarized your conclusions, which included some mitigation measures, and I think was a really helpful format. The second to last bullet on page 11 talks about RIDO acknowledges the impact of increased stress associated with the proposed facility on nearby residents, and goes on and then urges us to consider that in our siting decisions. When I read that, I wrote in the margins how, and I wanted to ask you just to elaborate or give your thoughts on that.
Well, so I haven't really, because that was, I think, linking to the mental health or the additional health concerns. I haven't really thought about it, but I can try to, I'm not sure how they wanted, or Barbara wanted the Efsb to consider that. Basically, I think keep in mind the residents' concerns and just be aware of that as a potential factor, but I don't know specifics.
I think some of what we talked about in regard to noise might be relevant to that. Also, and I knew there were specific topics today, but this is the last time we see you, I think.
Hopefully.
I'm sure. So, you know that we have to look at overall whether the facility will not cause unacceptable harm to the environment. And certainly public health and the people around the facility are part of that. So can you speak to, in its totality, whether your RIDO advisory opinions draw a conclusion on that in terms of unacceptable harm?
I don't think we draw a conclusion in terms of there being a harm or not. It's basically recommendations in terms of things to be kept in mind, but in terms of a bottom line, we didn't draw, this is a problem, this isn't a problem, to my knowledge.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for your response.
Is the fact that you did recommend some possible things to mitigate noise to do it, does that mean that you're of the opinion that they can be effectively mitigated?
Yeah, I believe.
No one else? Thank you very much.
Thanks.